Welcome to Fix It Home Improvement, covering projects that every homeowner should know and great products for home and garden.
Hi, I'm JC, and this is where we share weekly home improvement tips. I'm here with my co-host Cindy.
Hello, JC.
Hi, Cindy. Today we're going to be talking about high-efficiency toilets, and we'd like to thank Bradley Templin for liking and sharing the podcast. Some of the first toilets had the toilet tank separated from the bowl and attached high on the wall for maximum flushing power. So the tank was 70 to 80 inches above the floor, and you had to have a pull chain to flush it. And they were called high tank toilets or chain pull toilets, and the tanks were decorative on some to match cabinets or molding. And you had this long supply going up the wall to the tank, and then this curved flush pipe going down to the bowl. And you can still get some of these from specialty companies like Renovator Supply or Signature Hardware.
Why?
And, well, they're kind of cool looking, especially if you've got like an antique decor. So in the 1930s and the 1940s, the tanks started becoming attached to the bowl, and they had to have a much larger tank to get that same flushing power. So they used 5 to 7 gallons per flush.
Wow.
Compared to high-efficiency toilets now that use about 1.28 gallons or less. The first generation of 1.6 gallon per flush toilets didn't flush that well. So between 1994 and 1996, if you bought one of those toilets, or if you have one, most manufacturers...
How would you know? Just like knowing the age of your house?
Right.
You need to know the age of your toilet?
A lot of them, if you take the tank cover off, you'll see it stamped inside the tank, or sometimes on the back of the tank, you'll see the date on it. But most manufacturers, they were using their old bowls and their old tanks because, you know, the government changed how many gallons they could use per flush, but they weren't going to throw away all this inventory that they created. So they just reduced the amount of water in the tank, and so they didn't flush very well because they were used to using this large amount of water volume to flush a toilet. And now the new high-efficiency toilets, they're designed to create more flushing velocity to move water and waste. So there's less swirling in the bowls. The bowl opening, the trapway, the water flow, everything is designed completely different. And most of these high-efficiency 1.28 gallon per flush toilets are flushing much better than those original 1.6 gallon per flush toilets. I have some tips if you have a slow flushing toilet.
Yippee.
The height of the water in the tank should be about 1/2 inch from the top of the overflow tube on the flush valve. If you have a flap style flush valve, that slack in the chain should only be about 1/4 inch. If there's too much slack, it doesn't open fully, and so you're not going to get as much flushing power. And you should also check the angle of that chain if you have a flap. Sometimes it comes up at an angle, and so it's not going to open as well. If you change the angle of that chain on the lever, so there's different holes on the lever, adjust that so it opens fully when you push down the handle. You can also get adjustable flaps so they stay open longer. And if you have a 1.28 or a 1.6 gallon per flush toilet, this can really be helpful.
So these are the ones that have like the dial on it?
Right, and it's going to hold air in that flap longer. So it's going to stay open longer, so the water moving from the tank to the bowl is going to give you a better flush. If you have a flapper with those floats that sit above it, you can pull that float closer to the flap, and now it's going to stay open and you're going to get a better flush. If you have a canister style or a tower style flush valve, these are set by the manufacturer, so you can't purchase an adjustable canister. So they're set. The only thing you can do is just hold the handle down longer, and it's pretty amazing. If you look in your tank and flush it normally and see how much water moves out of the tank, and then just hold the handle down and watch how much more water. You'll double the amount of water that moves into the bowl, so you get a much better flush just by holding the handle down. You can also check the height of the water in the bowl. So the way you can do this is take a 5-gallon bucket and a couple of gallons of water inside the bucket and slowly pour it into the bowl until it doesn't rise anymore. And now you know the maximum height of water in the bowl. If you add any more water, it just goes right into the trap and out the main drain. So this is the height you want to get the best flushing. Take a pencil and mark that height, and then flush your toilet and see how the fill valve works. So if the fill valve doesn't get that water up to that line, what you can do is either adjust the fill valve if you have an adjustable fill valve, or replace it with a fill valve that's adjustable and get that water up to the maximum height, and you're going to get much better flushing.
Why would this ever change?
So if you've ever changed a fill valve in the past, you might have one that's not matched to your toilet. And this is something most people don't know with the high efficiency toilets. You have to have a fill valve that puts the right amount of water in the tank and the bowl. So if you run to your local hardware store and say you need a fill valve, and they don't ask you if it's for a high efficiency toilet, the two most popular fill valves are either going to be the Fluid Master or the Corky. And with the Fluid Master, the 400A fill valve is one of the most popular, been around since 1957. It adjusts from 9 to 14 inches to fit a lot of different size tanks. So retailers naturally say this is a good one. Also the Corky. The problem is it's not designed for these high efficiency toilets. So the 400A, for example, it puts 75% of the water into the tank and 25% of the water into the bowl. So for 3.5 gallon tanks or older, it's great. It fills.
So this is the one that they're going to have the most facings of, right?
Yes, yeah, right, absolutely. This is what most people grab.
Right, but it's wrong now.
Well, depending on your toilet, and that's the key. So this is going to fill some 1.6 gallon per flush tanks and all 1.28 gallon per flush toilets too fast. So it's going to shut off before there's enough water in the bowl for the best flush.
So you're going to end up going back to the store and getting a different one?
Well, you're going to wonder why I got a new fill valve and it's not flushing properly. You know, it doesn't seem like those two should be connected.
So the real problem is the retailers, not
right. Right, yeah, knowledge, yeah. So Fluid Master has a fill valve called the Performax. It's PERFOR_MAX, and this is for...
Shouldn't it be the 400B?
It's actually the 400AH.
Okay, I would say HE for high efficiency.
Or HET. So for 1.6 and 1.28 gallon per flush toilets, you're looking for the Performax. And this puts 55% of the water into the tank and 45% of the water into the bowl, and it's adjustable. So it has a roller clamp that adjusts the water level in the bowl for the best flush. Corky has a fill valve for high efficiency toilets called the Corky Platinum. 60% of the water goes into the tank and 40% into the bowl, and it can be adjusted to match your toilet. So if you have a 1.6 or 1.28 gallon per flush toilet and you want to change the fill valve, you're looking for either the Fluid Master Performax or the Corky Platinum.
And you're going to actually have to look for these.
Yeah.
It's not going to be the normal thing.
Yeah, and most retailers don't even know what you're talking about.
Are we going to cover the steps on replacing a fill valve?
So the first thing you want to do is turn off the shutoff valve going to the toilet. Flush the toilet and hold down the handle till the tank is completely drained of water. As low as it'll go, there's still going to be some water in the tank. So I would put a bucket underneath the supply line going to the old fill valve, and then remove the supply line at the toilet where the fill valve goes into the toilet. Remove the nut on the bottom of the tank holding the old fill valve, and then pull out the old fill valve. Make sure you have that bucket underneath there. All new fill valves will have a line marked with CL for critical level. So this line should be about an inch above the top of the overflow tube on the flush valve, or about even with the hole for the handle. So you want to adjust the height and then put it in the tank. Hand tighten the nut on the bottom of the tank to hold it in place. And the hose barb for the refill tube should point towards the flush valve. And then use that fitting they give you to attach the refill tube to the top of the flush valve, the overflow pipe. And so the tube is going to discharge water down into that pipe, and that's what's filling the bowl. And then water coming out of the bottom of the fill valve is what's filling the tank.
Interesting.
Some flush valves are going to have a cap on top of that overflow pipe on the flush valve, so you don't have to use that fitting. So turn on the water and adjust the amount of water in the tank so it's about a half an inch below the top of that overflow pipe. And now you have to find the height of the water in the bowl. So use a 5-gallon bucket, slowly pour water into the bowl till it stops rising, mark that height with a pencil, and then flush your toilet. If the water reaches that line and you still hear the fill valve running, you need to turn down the amount of water going into the bowl. So there's going to be a valve on the Corky fill valve and a clamp on the Fluid Master, and adjust that till the water just reaches that line as it stops filling the tank. And that's going to reduce the waste of water. And then if the water didn't reach the line, you want to increase the water going into the bowl. And you need the max amount of water in the bowl to get your best flush. A couple of tips with fill valves that are taking too long to fill. First thing I would check is the shutoff valve. Make sure it's completely open. And then check your supply line that it's not kinked. If you have a Fluid Master fill valve, turn off the shutoff valve going to the toilet. take the tank lid off and lift the float on the fill valve. Hold this with one hand, grab the cap and twist it counterclockwise about 1/8 of a turn to unlock it, and then lift off the cap and check for any debris in the top of the fill valve. Then take a cup and put it over the top of this, and then turn on your shutoff valve, and that's going to flush out all the debris. Turn it off, replace the cap, and then check it to see if it fills faster. And a lot of times that's all it takes, because you build up some debris in there. And if the float is getting stuck in the up position with the fluid masters, you can turn off the water to the tank, remove the cap, and then inside the cap there's a replaceable seal. If you replace that, it usually frees up the float. If you have a corky fill valve that's filling slow, turn off the water going to the toilet, then remove that tube that's going to the flush valve, remove your cap, and there's going to be a tab on the top of it that you push up. Remove the float. There's going to be 2 arms that you squeeze together on the top of the valve and then just pull out the float. And then you're going to turn the cap on the top counterclockwise about 1/8 of a turn. And then there's going to be a supply tube on the top of the valve. Pull that out, and on the bottom of that tube, you're going to see a white tab, which is part of a strainer. You're going to pull that strainer out of this tube and then rinse this off and brush it off. And this strainer catches small debris to protect the valve, which is a really interesting design. Put it all back together, and then when you have it back together, the corky has a little different design to adjust the height. You want to grab the whole top of the fill valve and twist it to make sure it's locked in place, and then turn on the water and test it. If cleaning or flushing the fill valve doesn't increase the speed that the tank fills, you can also check your shutoff valve and the supply line going to the toilet.
How would you do that?
So turn off the shutoff valve and remove the supply line at the toilet, and then take a bucket, point the supply line into the bucket, turn on the shutoff valve, and see if you have nice high pressure. If you do, then just change your fill valve in the toilet. But if you have low pressure, then you've got some debris either clogging the supply line or the shutoff valve.
So what do you do?
So you're going to have to replace the supply line first. Actually, just take off that supply line. You can blow through it, and if there's no problem there, you're going to have to change the shutoff valve. To get better flushing out of high-efficiency toilets, the flush valves have changed. So the standard flush valve was 2 inches since the early 1900s, but these high-efficiency toilets can have a 3-inch standard flush valve, a 3-inch oversized flush valve.
What does that mean?
Well, the size, so the opening, so the inside diameter of the flush valve itself. I mean, it's always been a standard. So you've always had like the universal flaps.
Right, I get that. I'm talking about the 3-inch oversized.
So rather than a standard 3-inch, it's slightly bigger, like 3.5 inches.
So why wouldn't they say 3.5 inches?
Because they vary. And then also 4 inches and multiple flush valves. So there's toilets that have 2 flush valves inside, so that the water moves from the tank to the bowl much quicker. And the flush valve can have a variety of styles. So the 2 most popular are either going to be a flap that everybody's used to, or it's going to be a canister style that needs a circular seal. If you have a leaking tank, you need to know what type of seal your flush valve has and the size, so either 2, 3-inch, oversized 3 or 4. For high-efficiency toilets with a flap, you're going to measure the inside diameter of the flush valve, and if it's about 3 inches, Corky kind of has a goof-proof flap. It's called their 3-inch universal flap. This has adjustable arms, so it's going to fit 3-inch and oversized 3-inch flaps. And then the flap also has an adjustable collar, so it regulates the air bubble inside the flap for how long it stays open for a better flush. For canister-style flush valves, bring the seal with you to the hardware store so that you can match the size exactly. And over time, the seals need to be replaced, and most manufacturers are recommending replace them once every 5 years for the best flushing power and no leaks. If you're thinking about purchasing a high-efficiency toilet, I have some tips.
Please share.
So the first thing you want to think about is the Roughin size. And a standard toilet, it's going to be a 12-inch Roughin. So you want to measure from the toilet bolts that are holding the toilet down to the wall. And that distance, if it's about 12 inches, that's your standard toilet. If you have an older home, that distance could either be 10 inches or 14 inches, and then you'll have to buy a special toilet. You also want to know the height. So from the bowl to the floor, the standard toilet is going to be roughly 14 to 15 inches. An ADA compliant toilet is 16.5 inches. And a lot of these toilets, they're called comfort toilets, or different manufacturers will have a different name. but they're 17 to 19 inches. And this is really good for older people, people with knee or hip problems, or tall people. It makes it much easier to stand up, although if you're a shorter person, it's not very comfortable.
Right, your feet are swinging.
Right. So you'd want to make sure that you maybe test it on a chair, or to see what's the most comfortable height for you before you purchase it, because there is a wide variety of heights now. For the bowl shape, you can either get standard or elongated. With the round or standard, it's about 16.5 inches from the holes for the toilet seat to the front of the bowl. Elongated, it's going to be about 18.5 inches. Most people find elongated more comfortable, but if you have a small bathroom or a townhouse or a condo, it might look better if you have a standard toilet. Also, think about the footprint and the wall print. I would measure where the toilet sits on the floor and the area it covers, because if you buy a new toilet and it has a very narrow footprint, when you replace it, you could have a big gap.
Like the base?
Yeah, the base of it. You could have a big gap where the tile ends and it doesn't cover it. And then also the wall, too. If you've tiled right up to the old tank and now you have nothing behind it, you want a new tank that's going to cover it. There's two main flush types. You have gravity and pressure assist. With the pressure assist, there's a tank that uses air pressure and water pressure to force water and waste down the drain. It very seldom clogs, and it uses very little water. Most of them are about 1 gallon per flush, depending on the model. But the one complaint, many people say they're too loud. With gravity flush toilets, you have siphonic or washdown. With the siphonic, the traps are 2 to 2 1/8 inch in general, and these are designed to pull waste out of the toilet. With washdown, the toilets are going to have larger traps and larger flush valves from 2 3/8 up to 4 inches, which is pretty wild. So the Australian Caroma toilets, it's Caroma, they have a 4-inch trap.
Outrageous.
So if you don't want to clog, the washdown styles have less clogs and they push the waste out of the toilet. But one of the biggest complaints with these washdown styles is they don't clean the bowl as well as siphonic. So with the siphonic, there's much more spinning and the water stays in the bowl longer to keep it cleaner. You can also get a dual flush, which saves water. You're only using about 1 gallon per flush for urine and 1.6 to 1.28 for waste and paper. And in fact, it saves so much water, it's the only type of toilet that's allowed to be sold in Australia and Singapore. You should look at and compare the MAP score. So it's capital M, small a, capital P. And toilets with a score of 350 grams or better are considered good flushing. 600 grams or better are the best for flushing. And what they use is soybean paste. So 350 grams was picked from the results of 3 medical studies measuring the amount of waste that goes into toilets.
Ugh, gross.
So 250 grams was the average one-time deposit. So 350 grams is in the 99th percentile. And so they figure if a toilet can flush 350 grams, it's really good flushing. You can also look for the WaterSense label. This uses 1.28 gallons of water or less and has a flushing power of at least 350 grams. So this is really an efficient toilet. I would also call the local village and see if there's any rebates if you purchase a WaterSense toilet. And then look at the handle location, because it can be on the top, the side, on an angle, on the front. And if you have your toilet tucked into a corner or against cabinets, you want to make sure that you can flush it.
Yeah, that's important.
There's also 1-piece and 2-piece toilets. 2-piece are the most common, and you have to assemble them. 1-piece are going to be more expensive, and they're usually the smaller toilets. Some top-rated high-efficiency toilets. Toto, T-O-T-O. They have their Entrada and their Drake. Both have 1,000-gram MAP score, which is outrageous. Kohler has their Santa Rosa and the Cimarron. They both have 1,000. The American Standard H2 option siphonic dual flush is 1,000 grams, and it's spelled, it's just a capital H, the number 2, and then a capital option. Niagara. So Niagara toilet is interesting. So it's Niagra. It uses 0.8 gallons per flush. One of the lowest I've seen. It uses a vacuum assist system. So it has an air tube that goes in from the tank to the bowl, actually into the trap. It raises the water level in the bowl. It pressurizes the trap for better flushing. And the Niagara dual flush, it uses 0.5 gallons for urine and 0.95 for waste. So just very interesting. And also one of the things on the Niagara, I was reading their information, it says it has a large footprint to cover old toilet spots. An interesting site I found was map-testing.com, so it's map-testing.com, and they have over 3,100 models of toilets that they rate, and they talk about the flushing score. Another interesting thing about high-efficiency toilets is you need a special plunger. So with a standard toilet, the opening in the bowl has always been circular, so you're going to have a flanged plunger. It seats itself, and it gets good suction so that you can plunge. With these high-efficiency toilets, the openings are either shaped like a comma or a shield. It's not a standard circular opening anymore. So you use a regular plunger. You run to the hardware store, say, hey, I need a plunger for a toilet. If they don't ask you, do you have a high-efficiency toilet, a standard plunger isn't going to work effectively. Isn't that weird?
Yeah.
So
they're
what
selling you the wrong fill valve and plunger.
So what's wild is the only one I've seen on the market right now, and I'm sure there'll be more, it's the Corky Beehive Max. And this has a special material that shapes itself to the opening. And what's nice about this is kind of goof-proof. So this is going to work with old toilets, and it works with the new high-efficiency toilets.
Do you have anything else to add?
We should have Book 4 ready to publish by the end of the month. We'll keep you posted on the date.
Let's wrap this up.
You can subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, the Spotify mobile app, the Google Play Music app, iHeartRadio, and CastBox.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a review.
You can check out our home improvement videos on our YouTube channel, Fix It Home Improvement.
And you can subscribe to that as well.
You can download our books, Home Improvement Solutions, What Every Homeowner Should Know, on Amazon.
If you enjoyed it, please leave us a 5-star rating and review.
You can email us at fixitpodcast@gmail.com, and you can follow Cindy on Twitter @FixitCohost.
Thank you for listening.
Talk to you next week.